Hi everybody, and welcome to the next tutorial on this Patreon page that will feature the Astraeus tank for the Primaris Marines. So I've chosen for these videos to be about the blue armor and the white armor. So we're going to start off with the blue armor, as you can see here, with a pre-highlight of aged white. This is a bit similar to my previous blue armor Primaris Marine, but there is a bit of a difference between a Primaris Marine and a big battle tank. And I also changed the recipe a little bit, so you get some variations to choose from if you so wish to. So I'm gonna be careful with the airbrush here, and I have diluted the aged white with 1 drop of aged white and 4 drops of the flow improver, no thinner. And you will get a little bit of stains from the aged white, but that's okay, the blue will cover that later. So I've chosen to go with a base of black instead of the dark sea blue that I used in the previous blue video of the Primaris Marine. And I think it contrasts better on bigger models. On smaller models like the Primaris, I wanted a bit more softer transition, but on the large models, as they're going to be huge and seen on far distances on the battlefield, I want them to be a little bit harder, so black is good for that. We're also going to use a little bit of red color in our shades later when we have done our airbrush. So when that's done, we'll take our royal blue and dilute it with a lot of thinner. So about 4 drops to 1 drop of royal blue would suffice. Otherwise, go with 1 or 2 extra drops. So carefully I airbrush this onto the hull here, and you can see that the black shines through as well as the white. Makes that nice color transition, and the stains from the white is covered up pretty nicely. So don't focus too much, small burst with the airbrush and you will cover it precisely as much as needed. If you do 4 bursts on one surface, the blue is going to cover and you don't want that, so 1 or 2 bursts only. 1 more if needed. So next we're gonna intense our highlighted areas with some Andrea blue. So previous video I used a scale color, I don't remember the name of it, but it was similar to Andrea blue, but I wanted to see what Andrea blue could do as well, so I decided to use it for this one, and I think it was pretty great for the tank. Don't think I would use it for the marine, but this is a larger model, so it needs more intense colors. And I use a piece of plastic card to make sure the blue doesn't get onto the darker areas of the tank. This is a neat little trick you can use if you are feeling experimental and more secure on your airbrushing. Otherwise you can mask it with some tape, masking tape, and but that will take some more time, of course. You have more freedom when using a piece of plastic like this. So all the previous highlighted areas I will cover with the Andrea blue. You see we make pretty nice use of our piece of plastic here. It creates that edge that we are looking for. You can see I got some on the darker surface, but don't worry, I will cover that up with some highlights and shades and rust later. If you make some small mistakes, you can all cover it up with rusts or other effects. Since it is a tank, it isn't clean since it's seen battle. Hopefully. If it's brand new, well, you don't want to rust it down, but then you have to be more careful with all your airbrushing and brushing. Next up we create our shade, and for that we'll use some black, hollow red and dark sea blue. So we're gonna mix these paints in about equal ratio of each paint. Oh, sorry, more of the hollow red and a little bit of the blue and black. So it will create a dark purple shade tone. It's kind of hard to see on my palette here, I'll say it again, about 2 brush strokes of hollow red and 1 brush stroke of black and a half brush stroke of dark sea blue. And we're gonna dilute it down so it gets very transparent with our glaze medium. And then we're gonna paint it in all our recessed areas and around the bolts and other details that's on the tank. So we make all the details pop more with this. And this cooperates really well with our pre-shaded blue and black surface that we did with the airbrush. This is something I recently discovered with this, that they are working pretty great together. So make sure to pull the paint towards the details, recessed areas, and make sure to don't get anything onto the armor itself, because that will break the effect of making the details pop. On some areas you have to be more of a free hand with your brush, since the paint won't flow down into the recessed part that easily. So you have to be steady on your hand instead. So practice makes perfect there. Otherwise, pretty easy to paint it down in the natural recessed areas. And I also shade down some larger areas that I know isn't going to catch the sunlight as much as others. If a plate is having an angle more than 90 degrees forward, I'm probably going to shade it down a bit more. So next up we're going to make a highlight onto our hull after we have done our shading. So first off, I was going to paint just one highlight on this tank, but the first one got a little bit too medium in its brightness, so I decided to do a second one after this. And I think the two highlights cooperated pretty well together. The first one makes the second one more intense and acts as a great base coat as well. So the second one doesn't get as diluted as the first one does with the darker blues. A fair bit of glaze medium in this as well, so we get our flow onto the edges. Makes it more softer onto the hull of the tank. So as previously mentioned with the shade, you have to do a little bit of freehanding here as well on some surfaces, but otherwise most of the parts. Tanks are pretty great that way, that you can let your brush slide through the edges and make most of the work for you. But sometimes you have to get in there yourself and make a straight line, and that can be frustrating a lot of the times if you're new to it. But if you do it, well, 1,000 times over, you will be pretty great at it. So as I said before, practice makes perfect. It's not gonna dilute the paint a lot, so it's barely visible when I brush it onto the tank, to make some light stripes in the middle of it to make it look more interesting and a little bit more shiny, as all surfaces catches some light, of course. And then I'm gonna make a more intense highlight in the middle later as well. So this will act as a base, more or less. So time for the final highlight on the hull, and you can see now that the previous highlight wasn't that bright, so it surely needs another one. And you can see now how the second highlight really shines through, as the previous highlight acts as a base, and that makes this next highlight here show off quite a bit more. You can see I get a little bit of color onto the hull that isn't supposed to be there, but that will be fixed later with some rust and dirt and armor scratches. So now we'll make the hull really pop with our 75% ice yellow with 25% Andrea blue. So 1 to 4 more or less. And as previously told, you only need to follow the edges of the armor, and we'll make the work for you. And a little bit of your own freehanding here and there. And if you want to, you can leave some areas that's more in the shadow, unhighlighted with the second highlight, and you will get a little bit more of the shadowy natural effect. But I decided to highlight as much as I could to make the armor stand out quite a bit. But you can see how intense and crisp the second highlight gets, and how nicely it touches the light spots that I made in the middle. These were not so intense in the end, since the armor isn't that shiny, but they are there and gives a purpose to the whole model. If you want to, you can go pure ice yellow or some aged white to make some light dots here and there if you want to. I can show that in other videos as well, but if you have watched the Primaris video, I did some light spots in that one. So if you're feeling more adventurous, you can do this on the tank as well. Now we'll take some black and hull red, a 50-50 mix, and I will start to make some chipped armor with this, with a stippling brush, as the one I showed in the rusty metal video that I did previously last month. It's important to get a lot of the paint off the brush when doing this, but in some cases you can leave a lot of it on there as well if you want some more intense damages, but then just push the brush once against the tank and not a lot of times. If you have a small amount of paint on your brush, push it a couple of times in the same area to get a more dirt, shadowy, dry brush effect. I do this on the darker areas to intensify them a little bit more, and make a bit more invisible damages onto those areas. But on the brighter areas I use a little bit more intense stippling to create more revealing damage effects. And don't go overboard with this. We still want our highlights to be visible. Our shadows will be fine since it's basically the same paint, except for this one doesn't have the dark sea blue in it, and that's really important for it to stand out, since red contrasts with blue. So now we're gonna make our last step here with some scrag brown. I'm gonna mix this in with our shadow paint we used when painting the recessed parts of the tank. Just a little bit of it to give it a hint of our most deepest colors, to blend it in more with the blue and the dark. And I will paint this around the bolts and some of the recessed parts as well. I will let the rust flow down into. Then we'll make some stains running down from the bolts, and some flat surfaces will be a little bit more rusty. If you get too much paint on a surface, you can use your finger to scrape it up a little bit. It will also push out the paint a little bit more and make a more rusty effect as well. You can use a lot of glaze and keep the ratios at different levels to intensify the rust or make it more transparent, whatever you choose to, whatever fits your paint job. But when painting on a flat surface, I like to build up the rust and blend it more towards the recessed area and make it more transparent at the ends and more intensified at the recessed edges. So this was the blue part. See you in the part 2, where I will paint the white armor on the tank.